Welcome back to the Seth Rosczewski Podcast. Today in the smoking room, we have a very special guest, Senator John Keenan. John, thank you so much for coming by today.
Great. Thanks for having me, Seth. I really appreciate it.
Totally. I was wondering if you could just kind of, if someone was to say, who is Senator Keenan? Well, how would you describe yourself?
Good question. Still trying to figure that out. No, at 61, you'd think I'd know. Well, I'm a state senator. That's what I do, but that's not really how, what's most important in my life. I guess, first and foremost, I'm a father and a husband to my wife, Jean. I've got 3 boys, Chris, Tim, and Kevin, and that's probably the most important thing, and so that's how I've always kind of seen myself. And then what I do for work is I'm a state senator for the Norfolk and Plymouth District, which is Quincy, Braintree, Abington, Rockland, Holbrook, and Hanover. So that keeps me pretty busy. But I think that's who I am is a husband and a father and come from a big family.
Those are like the most important titles that you can get, husband, father, and making sure that you can do those is what everybody strives for, So you went to Harvard, right?
I did.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience there, how you got into Harvard, and what really made you pick that school over other schools.
So when I was in, when I was in high school, I was a senior. I was applying to colleges, and I thought I'd stay local. A little context: my father, I don't know what grade he went to. He lost his both parents, when he was about 6 or 7 years old. So he was the youngest of 8. So they kind of stuck together, and they moved from Roxbury over into the old Harbor housing projects in South Boston. And he went to school, but he never told us what grade he went to. We never knew whether he graduated. My mother did graduate from high school, but didn't go to college. And so I figured, and I was the middle of 7 children, and at that point, my oldest brother had started college. He went to Boston State, but then stopped there. And so I was really the first one to go away to college. And so I applied to BC, Holy Cross, and Suffolk University, figuring I'd stay somewhat local. And then one of my high school teachers pulled me aside and said, why don't you apply to Harvard? You apply to Harvard. And I said, 1, I don't think I'll get in. And 2, if I get in, I can't afford to go there. And she said, do me a favor, apply. I'll write you a letter of recommendation. And so I did. And I got in. And I got in, I think, for a few reasons. One, I had decent grades. I had good grades. I was near the top of my class, but not the top-ranked student in the class. I didn't have the best SAT scores out of my kind of group of, we were in the advanced placement classes. I didn't have the top SAT scores. They were really good, but not the best. So people with better grades and better SATs applied to Ivy League schools and didn't get in. I got in, and I think it's for a couple of reasons. One, I had good enough grades, decent enough SATs, and I was captain of the soccer team, and I played basketball. I was president of the student council, so I think those things helped. Mm-hmm. But I really think what it came down to was that Harvard has this way of filling classes to try to make them as interesting as possible so that classmates learn from each other.
Yeah.
And I kiddingly say, I think I was kind of the Irish Catholic kid from a public high school near Boston. And they admitted everybody else, and they got down and said, we forgot this category. We forgot this kid. Who do we have? And they pulled my name out and said, yeah, he's fine. I really kind of think that's what happened. So I went there, and I accepted, and the financial aid, well, it's a funny story. When I got accepted, I remember I came home from school, and the package was at home, so I opened it up, and it said I got into Harvard. And then I opened up the financial aid package, and I thought, I don't know. It seems like maybe I'll be able to go. And so I called my mother. She was working. She worked at Filene's as a sales clerk. I said, hey, Mom, I get into Harvard. And she goes, oh, okay, I don't know if we can afford it. Go wake your father up and tell him he's going to have to work another shift. And my father worked nights and days and whatever, so he was napping at the point. So I go up to my father and say, hey, Dad, I get into Harvard. He says, tell your mother to play the number on the way home, because I think that's the only way you're going to be able to go. And so that was kind of it. But I got there. The big thing that I got in financial aid was work study. And so I got a work study award, and I just worked like crazy while I was there. I worked in the athletic department, in the equipment room. And you get enough work study to last you the year. That's the award that they give you. I earned all of mine usually by October. And then I'd have to go back and ask them for more work study, and that would get me through December. And then the athletic department would put me on their regular payroll for the second half of the school year, and then sometimes even summers. So I worked a lot, which was a bit of a different Harvard experience.
Yeah. And you went for law, right?
Well, my undergraduate was in government.
Government. Okay.
Yeah, so I was a government concentrator or major in college.
And you ended up becoming a lawyer, if I saw that correctly?
Yeah, so right after college, I went to law school, Suffolk University Law School in Boston, which was a great school. Same thing. I went there and I didn't have the typical law school experience because I'd go to class at 9, be done at 12 or 1 o'clock, and then I would just go to work.
Yeah.
I worked at law firms. When I was in high school, college, and early law school, I worked the overnight shift whenever I could get a shift at the newspaper where my father worked in the mailroom. So mostly I did that Saturday nights, and then whatever else I had to do for work to kind of pay for law school as well, and on top of my loans.
Right. What inspired you to enter politics, and what keeps you motivated as the years go by?
So as far as inspiration, I don't know if it was so much politics, but when it literally was 50 years ago.
Yeah.
When I was in 5th grade, I had a teacher who struggled, I think, with some mental health issues, to be perfectly honest. She's long deceased. And so a lot of the other teachers did not want to deal with her. And so while you would rotate classes typically in the 5th grade, they didn't want to deal with her. So we had her for math, for English, for history. And she was really into the bicentennial. This was 1975. And so we went out and about. So the Freedom Trail should bring us all into Boston. We put on a production of the musical 1776. And that, to me, was just a phenomenal year. So much going on with the bicentennial. She got us so engaged in the history of Boston and the history of the country that I just kind of thought this is a pretty remarkable thing as a 5th grader. I thought this is really cool. And so here it is 50 years later, and I think that was the inspiration for me really to get involved in government. And we had some students at the State House yesterday, and I was telling them 2 days ago, I was telling that story that 50 years ago, almost exactly, I was their age, and a teacher that I had really influenced me and kind of gave me the interest in government and the founding of the country.
Yeah, Boston's pretty powerful. I remember when I was younger in grade school, elementary school, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, whatever it was. I remember going to the State House and visiting all the statues and stuff like that, and just seeing the statues and starting to learn a little bit about the history. It's a really powerful experience, and it kind of makes you think. And it was always interesting. I wanted to go for law when I was in high school, but then I found the media thing, and the media thing kind of just took off. So we went
doing
with
quite well with it.
Thanks. So I was wondering about what any key legislative points that you're looking to hit on in 2025, and how do you plan on addressing them?
Sure. So we're always involved in mental health and substance use issues. So we have a few bills addressing mental health and substance use. One is we want to make sure that insurance companies provide proper coverage for people who are getting treatment for mental health or substance use issues. Things are getting better in that respect, but we're worried that they're going to turn. So one of the things we have is a bill to make sure that if somebody goes in for substance use treatment in particular, that they get that treatment for at least 30 days and it's covered by insurance companies. Some of them are starting to do that because of a bill that we passed several years ago that mandated coverage for 15 days. We want to see it at 30 days because that's what most people need to get through the first 2 stages of their treatment. If they're substance use, if they're involved with opioids, for instance, it really 30 days is kind of a critical point, and then they move on to the next levels of treatment. So we want to make sure that that gets covered. On the mental health side, we find that it takes a while for somebody to find a mental health provider, a psychiatrist, or a social worker that they connect with and that you get the proper treatment from. And nowadays, you can switch a job and your insurance changes, or the company that you work for may change their insurance coverage. And now all of a sudden you don't have access to that provider, that person, that psychiatrist or social worker that you've been dealing with because they're not covered by the same insurance. Mm-hmm. And so you have to go find somebody else. What we want to see is that if you found the right person, that there is a continuation of that treatment so that you're not without treatment scrambling to find a new provider, and meanwhile your struggles with mental health get worse. So we want to make sure there's a continuation of treatment.
It's a really, that's like such an important topic. My girlfriend, she has a spinal cord injury, CRPS. It's maybe not spinal cord, but it's like a autoimmune disease type of thing that, she can't really move correctly. But she just switched. She just turned 26, so she just changed insurances, and she had trouble finding an insurance policy that was reasonably priced that took all her doctors. And it was something that she had to really sit down with and think about and do all this research. And I was like, oh, I just took whatever my job gave me. I never really had to look into it, but it is a little crazy with the insurance and the hoops that they kind of make you jump through.
Last session we had filed a bill to help people with MS. So and when you have MS, ultimately you get the right medication, and the insurance companies would pay for that. But sometimes then if there's a change in insurance or you switch jobs or whatever and you had a new insurance provider, they would say, oh, we want you to try this medication or that medication. And with diseases like MS, if you're at a certain point and you regress because you're off your medication or there's a change in medication that doesn't work, you never gain back what you've lost.
Right.
And so we were able to pass legislation, much like we're trying to do on the mental health side, that if you have a change in coverage, you have MS, that the insurer has to make sure that they're providing coverage for that medication that works for you during any transition from one health plan to another. And it's just so important for people to make sure they have that coverage.
It really is. Are there any other bills that you're thinking about sponsoring or co-sponsoring? Anything that's prospective that you're looking into or you have that you want to share?
Yes, one of the ones that we've spent a lot of time on lately is we're calling it the Better Health Act, BETTOR. When sports betting passed in Massachusetts, there was just a flood of advertising. It was on social media, it was on TV and radio, it was on billboards, trash cans in Boston. They put the advertising on. You couldn't escape it. And so a lot of people raised that issue with me saying, this is out of control. You're not necessarily opposed to sports betting, but the advertising is everywhere, and people felt it was misleading. So last session we filed a bill to try to address the advertising aspects of it. The bill didn't make it to the governor's desk, but as we were working on that, we started to hear more and more from people saying beyond the advertising, some of their other practices are just outrageous, and they're not well known, but for people who are betting, they're really a problem. And so we put together the bill that we filed this year called the Better Health Act, and it does a couple things. One, the things that we really want to address is that people who bet a lot get assigned what they call a host, and that host is paid based on how much the person bets.
Oh, my God.
And so there are many people who have conveyed to us that they recognized their sports betting was getting a little out of control, so they stopped. And then they got a phone call from this host saying, hey, we haven't heard from you for a while, and what do you think? We'll boost your bet in the Celtics tonight, and we'll give you so many bonus points. Just trying to get the person to bet again, even though the person was trying to stop. And so these hosts constantly do that. That's how they make their money. And think of it, if you've said, I've had enough of sports betting, or I'm struggling with addiction to sports betting, I'm taking a break, and all of a sudden they're calling you. If you had stopped drinking and were walking down the street and you walk by the bar that you used to went to, and the bartender's like, hey, I know you're trying to stop drinking, but come on in. I'll give you 2 shots and a beer on the house. We wouldn't stand for that.
No.
And even when you compare the sports betting to alcohol, we train bartenders, and they have to be certified on how to serve alcohol responsibly, not to overserve, to notice signs whether somebody's drunk, not to let them drive. And then if they do drive, we have laws saying you're going to be arrested for drunk driving. When it comes to sports betting, there are no limitations on how they go after people to sometimes bet more than they can. There's when they develop a problem gambling or addiction to gambling, there's no training for the companies on how to back off. In fact, they do just the opposite. They go at them. They go at them with advertising, with these hosts reaching out. They make these prop bets readily available during games. They hit them with in-game advertising, which we're trying to address. And the companies are doing this while making an absolute fortune. And we know, based on studies in other states and in Europe, that they make most of their money off of problem or addicted gamblers, and they just keep focusing on them.
Right.
And so we're calling it the Better Health Act to try to make sure that the industries, they can have sports betting, but don't target people, don't go after them, don't be unfair or deceptive in your advertising, pay a fair tax. In Massachusetts, the tax, not on winnings, but on the corporation is at 20%. And in New York, New Hampshire and Rhode Island is 51%.
Oh my God.
So we want to raise ours to be equal to the surrounding communities and use that money to put some public health treatment programs in place. And a lot of people say, well, they bet. That's their fault. And yeah, sure, people can bet. And most people bet, drink responsibly. It's not an issue. But there are some who struggle with it, and the industry goes after them. I heard one guy tell me he had a really bad gambling problem. He lived down in the Pennsylvania area, Philadelphia, and he went into recovery, went in again, felt like he was making progress, and all of a sudden he gets the call. Yeah. And they offered him front row seats at the Philadelphia 76ers game. He took his wife, didn't tell her how he got the tickets, and was introduced to Joel Embiid, the star of the team, at half court. Oh my God. And his wife finally asked him, how did this all happen? He said, well, I relapsed. The sports betting company came at me and offered me these things, and I couldn't say no. Yeah. We hear about parents watching games with kids and seeing all these ads and struggling. The NCAA, former Governor Baker from Massachusetts, the head of the NCAA, they want to ban prop bets, meaning bets on individual performances, because one, it's creating concerns about cheating and everything else, and we've seen that in the NBA already. But two, if a college kid or a pro athlete, and the pro coaches are concerned about this, misses a free throw at the end of the game, the people who have lost money come down to the bench and start yelling at the players. They're waiting for the players outside the arena when they're leaving and going to the bus, screaming at them, you cost me $1,000. And so the NCAA has come out and said, we don't want this. We don't want prop bets. It's too much.
Yeah, and a lot of the NCAA, the kids, they're 18 years old. Mm. Maybe if they're younger, getting into school, 17. But yeah, like 18 to 20, like that's a lot of stress for
it is
an 18 to 20-year-old. And the whole sports gambling, like DraftKings and the other apps, they're so addicting. Like I remember the first time I had any experience with them, I don't gamble really anymore. I work too hard for my money. But I remember it was like bet $5, get 200 free. And I was like, this is a great deal. And it's like, they just hit you with these offers and it's like, okay, well, I'm only spending $5. I could win, 500 or this or that. And then they put the prices there. It really is crazy.
They do that to make you familiar with their platform, find out how easy it is, and this is like free money, and that's how they do it. Yeah. And then for every 100 people that sign up, 50, 60, 70 may kind of drift away from it, and then you've got 30, 40, or 50 people still doing it, and out of that, you might have 5 that are hitting it really hard. Yeah. And those are the ones based on all the data they have. They have data on everything that you do relative to sports betting. They will target people.
I used to bet on NASCAR, and that was like the odds were just like so crazy. Like, okay, I want Larson. I think Larson's going to come top 3 in this race, but he come in 15th, and I'd lose my money. And then I was like, you know what? I've lost 3 times in a row. I'm done with this. Yeah. I'm all set here. I got a house I got to support. But I was wondering, like, over the next few years, 5 years, maybe a decade, how do you see your work impacting the community that you serve?
Yeah, sometimes it's a direct impact. You can see it when you do something. You may get funding for something at a local level, and you can see the impact pretty quickly. If it's funding for a school program or a community program, like you might see, we try to get funding for the local council on agings, and so we do that, and then you go in and you see, they're offering programming directly as a result of that money. So that's kind of nice. Some of it you don't see immediately. When I got in the legislature, I did a lot of work on the substance use in the opioid field, and we updated our prescription monitoring program. One thing after another, we had about 4 things that were kind of nation leading, and you don't know if they're working. Yeah. And then ultimately, when you see the overdose deaths finally starting to turn down, and you understand from the data why, then you say, okay, some of that stuff that we did that didn't have a direct impact, with time, cumulatively had an impact. And so that's pretty rewarding. Just a quick personal example. So I just got my hip replaced a few weeks ago. Yep. And I was in the hospital, and I came out from under the anesthesia, and they said, you'll be going home, and we have a prescription for opioids for you. And they said, we want to talk to you a little bit about opioids and the dangers of opioids. And then they said, we just want to let you know that you have the option not to get your full prescription filled, that you can do what they said, you can do a partial fill. And I kind of smiled, and the woman says, I noticed you smiled about that. I said, yeah, those are bills that I filed and passed.
That's awesome.
We were the first state in the country to pass partial fill law. And here I am, and that was probably 10 years ago, 11 years ago. Here I am in the hospital, and the physician assistant, I think it was a physician assistant, might have been a nurse practitioner, was telling me, you have a right to partial fill in Massachusetts. We want to make sure that you know that so that you don't feel like you have to use all the medication. And so that was many years later that I had the personal experience with it.
That is so cool to like actually firsthand see your work in use. Like be like, I'm part of the reason that this is an option. It must be gratifying. It is,
but then sometimes you realize it's just so much work that has to be still done. We did so much in the opioids. We did partial fill. We updated our prescription monitoring program. We made doctors use it, which then resulted in now almost a 60% reduction in the number of opioids that are prescribed. We mandated coverage for treatment, and then we were able to figure out whether some of the stuff is working because we did a new way of collecting data. Just a quick story. I went to a morgue in Boston, and there was dead bodies on the, being subject to autopsies. So I asked the medical examiner how many of those are Jane and John Doe's. She told me the number, and I said how many of them are from opioid overdoses. And I don't remember whether she said 6 or 7, whatever the number was. And so AJ, who was my chief of staff, was with me, and we got back to the office, and we said we've always wanted to figure out a way to track people through a system, respecting their privacy, but figure out how did they end up dead from an overdose? Did we miss something in treatment? Did they not have access? Did they get treatment that didn't work? And so we literally came back from the morgue, kicked around this idea, and filed legislation, and it passed really quickly, that allowed all the data sets that are out there that the state has some input or control over to communicate with each other. So we had data from the medical examiner's office. We had data from the insurance claims database showing whether that person in the morgue maybe had been to an emergency department the day before, whether they had come by ambulance. We had data from the Department of Corrections and the sheriff's offices to know whether they had maybe come out of a correctional facility. We had data from the court system, were they involved in the courts, data from the police databases, had they been arrested. So we were able to use all that data to then help us with policy. And when I was doing this work, as I'm still doing it, and I still hear from parents, one of the things they always said to me, which I found interesting, was they said, I wish my son or daughter would get arrested and held, because then I know they'd be safe, they'd maybe get into treatment, and honestly, we could have a night's sleep without worrying about the phone ringing telling us that they had overdosed.
I'm not a parent. I haven't unlocked that feature yet, but that I can't even imagine that feeling. It's got to be gut wrenching.
And so we did all this data collection, and here are parents thinking this is best for my child. They'll be in jail. They'll hit rock bottom. Maybe they'll get treatment. We'll finally get to rest knowing the phone's not going to ring. And what the data showed was that people coming out of our jails and our state correctional facilities had a much, much higher chance of dying from an overdose than those that never went in.
Really?
Yeah, and so parents were hoping this was the best for the children, and we find out that it was just the opposite.
Really?
So then we used it to get legislation passed that allows enhanced treatment in correctional facilities and also allows access to buprenorphine, which is Suboxone, in the correctional facility, and methadone in the correctional facilities, so that they can start on that treatment while they're there, and then when they released from the correctional facility, transition smoothly or continue their treatment, as opposed to having it stop when they come out, or if they were on it when they were going in, have it stop when they were in jail, and then they come out 2 months later or 3 months later thinking they can use the same amount of drugs, still feeling that urge, and they go and use the same amount they were using, and they die.
Really?
And so that data collection helped us kind of craft that policy.
What do you see is the most pressing issue in the community in the district that you serve right now?
There's a few. Homelessness is climbing in every community that I represent, whether it's in Quincy or Hanover, or in Rockland, Abington, Holbrook, everywhere. Homelessness is rising, and that ties into the cost of housing.
Yeah.
The cost of housing is just so high for people. They're struggling for rents and housing?
I was watching something. It was a comparison on prices from, I think it was 1997, like home prices from, we'll say 1997 to now. It's like back then, like a reasonable house was like 80,000, and the income was like 60,000. So, like breaking it down, like the weekly payout was like 25%. Now it's like the income has only gone up, 20 or so thousand on average for the country, but the home prices have went up, quadrupled. It's an issue because people can't afford the mortgage anymore.
Okay, my father, who worked in the mailroom at the Boston Record American, which became the Boston Herald, when they bought our house, the house that we grew up in Quincy, there were 7 kids. My father was able to buy that house on his one newspaper mailer salary. Think of that. And now, you just can't. You can't even consider it. Here was, my mother and father, 7 kids. At that time, my father was the only one working. He was working as a newspaper mailer, and he bought a house in Quincy that was big enough for 7 kids.
Oh, my God.
And, in a nice neighborhood, a kind of typical working class neighborhood. You can't do that now.
No, you can't. And we also got to remember that people my age, 25, even younger, 23, 24, are graduating college. If they go to university, say they go, we'll be conservative. We go to, like a community college that's funded by the state, and then they go to a 2-year university, they're still $60,000, $70,000 in debt. And if they go 4 years and live there 2 years, they're almost $200,000 in debt. It's like I have a friend of mine, and he went to one of those universities, and he is, I think, $180,000, and he just bought a house too. It's like I can't even imagine the feeling of $500,000 in debt.
Yeah,
it's scary, and it's I kind of feel bad for the people that are my age, because I don't really feel that the school district talks about it. I just got out of the school district 7 years ago. So it's like we didn't really have any understanding on debt, and I felt like they kind of just pushed college.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's really hard. My oldest son just recently got married. He has a good job. His wife works. She's a nurse practitioner, so they do pretty well, and they just can't find a place.
Yeah.
They're going to move north of Boston because my daughter-in-law is from New Hampshire, so they're trying to find a halfway spot. But they've been going into house after house, and they see the price, and they say, well, maybe we can do that. And then when they see the first price, then they go and visit the house. And it's $800,000, and it needs all kinds of work.
Yeah.
And so they'll find something, I'm sure, and they're very fortunate. They've been able to pay off their loans while they're kind of trying to save for a house.
Yeah.
But it's tough. And when you don't have housing, and you're in an apartment and the rents go up, and then you lose that, and we get calls on this. People are living in cars. They're living in encampments in some of the wooded areas of the towns that I represent, and even the city of Quincy, they have these encampments. And then they're more likely to struggle with mental health issues. They're more likely to show up in an emergency department, which costs us more than if they were in a home and just kind of living their life. So it all kind of, in some ways, comes back to lack of housing that's affordable. And when you don't have that, it impacts everything. Kids don't go to school regularly if they don't have a stable living environment. People miss work if they don't have a stable living environment. People are more likely to be sick if they don't have a stable living environment. Yeah. And all of those things end up costing society as a whole. Yeah. So we've got to figure out a way. We passed the biggest bond bill that we ever passed for housing, and the goal is to create a couple 100,000 units of housing over the next several years. But it's like even that's not fast enough.
Right.
And then you have a lot of towns that are hesitant to build more housing within the community. So
yeah,
we've got to figure out a way.
Yep. How do you balance the needs of your district's priorities along with the statewide priorities?
A lot of times they're the same. Like we're here in Rockland, they've got a concern about funding for education. Mm-hmm. And so we try to address that as best we can through some local things, but ultimately that's part of the bigger state issue on local aid. And so we meet with the Ways and Means Chair, and I did just about 2 weeks ago maybe, to talk about our budget priorities. And normally I go in with a pretty long list. This year I narrowed down the list and conveyed, the more that we can do on local aid, meaning school aid in particular, we should do it because we've got communities all across my district and all across the state that are really struggling in terms of trying to meet the educational needs of the community. And so that was our first priority when we met with Ways and Means, and that feeds into everything else as well. And then on top of the school aid, other aid that would help police and fire and seniors and veterans at the local level, that's a top priority for the locals. And it's also, those are funded through statewide programs. So it's pushing for a statewide program that will mean more money locally. And then we try to get kind of one-off things, whether it's for a certain program in a school system, for senior centers, those types of things.
Yeah. How do you stay connected to diverse communities that you may represent?
We do it with as much outreach as we can, doing things like this.
Yep.
Which
Thank
you.
I'm going to call all the local access stations that you represent, and I'm going to try to get them to air this as many times as they will.
Right.
Through their channels, so that everybody can see it. I think that's really important.
Yeah. So we just did a round when we did it
Yep.
over at the school. We try to do that through the cable stations, but then we hold office hours regularly. We'll do a rotation of office hours during the day at senior centers. So we'll go through, and every senior center in the district will schedule an office hour, and I'll go. People will come in. We'll chat about whatever their concerns are, try to address any issues that they have, and then I'll chat with the seniors in the senior center. So we do that pretty regularly, and then we also do them at night, whether it's at a town hall, at a local library, and then we did one virtually, which was interesting. We did that within the past month or thereabouts. And then it's just anybody that calls that says, "Oh, I missed the office hours." We'll say, "Fine, I'll meet you at the library in whatever town it is, or if you want to meet at a coffee shop, we do that." And then we keep in touch with the local officials pretty regularly. I mean, and Rockland's local elected officials are on top of things. We're in touch with them all the time, and Abington's has some issues, unfortunately, with the train crossings lately.
Yeah.
So we're in regular contact with them. So it's just by contact, being out there for office hours, and then hitting events as much as possible. Most nights I'm out at a different event in some of the communities. It's tough to keep up with them. I can't be everywhere at once, but it might be at a veterans event one night, a school event the next night in another community. It might be a meeting in a library in another community the next night. So it's you just try to do as much of that as possible.
That is something that I've heard about you, is that you're always at fundraisers or town meetings or any type of special event that the local government is doing. I have been told that many times. "Oh, Senator Keenan might show up," and I'd be like, "Oh, cool! I can't wait to talk to him."
Yeah, and you get feedback from people. You show up, and people generally aren't shy, so they'll come up and say, "Hey, here's what I'm thinking about this. Here's what I'm thinking about that." And that's great to hear it. Yeah. I hear it, literally at the supermarket.
Yeah.
And it's that's how we hear things.
How is that? Do you get recognized places like like say you were to go to the Marshfield Fair, or you were to go, to the supermarket? How often does that happen?
It does happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's kind of funny. It happens in different spots. When you least expect it, you'll say hi to somebody and they'll say, "Oh, aren't you John Keenan, Senator from Quincy? I live in Rockland. I live in Abington. I live in Braintree." And it might be somewhere else in the state that all of a sudden they'll do it. And you think, what are the odds that I run into somebody here?
Yeah.
So as I was getting ready for my hip surgery, I was going to the YMCA. Part of physical therapy, I'd go and do these water exercises. And so, here I am, gray-haired guy in the pool, stretching and everything else. And all of a sudden I hear a knock on the window. The Y in Quincy has, as you come into the building, the pool's there, and it has big, long plate glass windows. Yep. And so people kind of look in, and somebody's knocking on the window, and, I'm just trying to do my exercise, like, "Hi, Senator Keenan." And I'm white as a ghost, my little pot belly, and it's like, "Hey, how's it going?" So yeah, no matter kind of where you go, but it's fine. Thankfully, it's not like celebrity status or anything. It's just people who kind of recognize you from, hitting the different events.
That is cool. I have a couple hot topics
that
I really want to hit on that I know the viewers at home are like so eager to talk about. I always post to Facebook. I always post to X, Twitter. This is who I'm interviewing, or this is who I'm talking to. Let me know what questions you have and what you want them to talk about. And one of the main topics that I actually got phone calls about this, was how do you think the state should address the ICE raids and ICE, in this community.
Sure.
It seems to be everywhere.
It is everywhere. It's a huge concern, and I can understand the federal government's and the citizens' desire to get people who are here without documentation and who are creating problems, or committing crimes. I can understand the desire to say, you know what, you've got to go. I get that. But I'm still convinced, despite some of the rhetoric, that the vast majority of people who are here, they want the same things everybody else wants. They want a roof over their head. They want to be able to work and provide opportunity for their kids. Just a quick aside, twice I have gone to a place called Moria refugee camp. It's on the island of Lesbos, which is a Greek island off the coast of Turkey. I don't know if you remember years ago, there was this picture of a little baby that washed up on shore dead, who had died it was internationally recognized. And it was a little baby who had died in the crossing from Turkey to this island of Moria, and to the refugee camp there. So I've been to Moria twice to work and volunteer in the refugee camp. And what I learned there was, at the time it was recognized both times as the worst refugee camp in the world. It was people just living on hillsides without bathrooms, without running water. They were just trying to live in tents and sleep in bags. And what I learned there from people is they do want the same things. Everybody there was escaping a horrendous situation. And what they wanted was just to get away from that so that they could provide for their kids, again, a roof over their head, put food on the table, and to give their kids opportunity. And they were willing to do anything it took in terms of risk to do that and in terms of work. In the refugee camp, I was amazed at how many refugees would build tents and structures for other refugees so that they'd have a roof over their head. So that's that's part of the context of it. And so people want the same things. But if they're going to come here and not want those things and not work towards those things and instead commit crimes and everything, yes, we want to move them out. But we also have a thing called due process here in the United States. And I talk about when I was a kid 50 years ago and the revolution and the Boston Massacre and all those things leading up to it. People forget that John Adams from this area defended the British soldiers because he felt that in the Boston Massacre, because he felt that they had a right to due process. They had a right to a trial and they had a right to counsel. And so we have people now being taken off of our streets that don't even have a chance to say, hey, wait a minute. They're essentially being they're guilty until proven innocent. And in one of the more high-profile cases, I think it was the one that was down at Columbia University where they quickly moved the guy down to Louisiana. And then they started to put some, I'm telling you, it had to do with the ones that they were shipping off to the prisons in El Salvador. A judge asked, what information do you have to suggest this person was in a gang? And I have the quote on my phone, and I can maybe pull it out. I should pull it out because I want to make sure that I get it accurate.
Sure.
Give me a moment. So anyway, they were in court doing this, and they were asked, what proof do you have? And the response was, and this is a quote, the lack of specific information about each individual actually highlights the risk they pose. It demonstrates that they are terrorists with regard to whom we lack a complete profile. So they're calling them a terrorist, and in the same statement admitting we don't know anything about this person, but they're a terrorist.
I can see where that can be the vernacular of it is problematic for sure.
And so, let's say that they come up to somebody and they take them. The burden of proof is on that individual to prove that they're not a terrorist, because the government says we don't have enough information to show that they actually are. We lack specific information about each individual, and it demonstrates that they are terrorists to whom we lack a complete profile. So they don't know anything about this person, they're kind of saying, and they say not knowing about this person makes them a risk of being a terrorist. So it means that person has to prove that they're not a terrorist, as opposed to the government, historically, as we've done it, having the burden of proof that you're innocent until you're proven guilty. And I know some people say, well, they're not citizens. But historically, if you are in our country, whether you're a citizen or not, whether you're a British soldier, firing upon the colonists, firing upon the citizens of Boston, you have a right to due process and a right to counsel and a right to make sure that the government has met its burden. We're flipping that here, and that's, in my mind, really dangerous. Again, if you suspect somebody has committed a crime, that they're not here legally, charge them with that.
Yeah.
And then there's due process, and if they can't, defend themselves properly, if they lose the case, then off they go. But this nation has been built on due process, and what we're seeing now with picking people off the streets is just the opposite.
That's a really good point. I never really looked at it that way, but that's a good point. So who is ICE targeting? Now I know that that's like such a weird question, but like, are they targeting school children? Are they targeting everybody? Are they targeting just criminals? Who are they going after? Because I feel like there's a lot of controversy and conspiracy clouding ICE and the subject.
Yeah, I don't know specifically, but from what you read in the press accounts, I think it's fairly broad. Clearly, they are going after people who they have information on, who they have proof are people here who have committed crimes. Mm-hmm. They've been charged with crimes already. They've been perhaps convicted of a crime and maybe haven't yet gone to serve time, or maybe they served some time and were out on parole. It's clear that they're targeting those that they view as criminals, charged, convicted criminals who are here illegally, and they're looking to remove them. And I think most people say, okay, do that, make sure there's due process, but that's what you said you were going to do, that's okay. But it seems like now they're going beyond that, and particularly in the case in Columbia, at Columbia University, and the case at Tufts University, they're targeting students who they believe have expressed anti-Semitic views and are supporters of Hamas. And the case in Somerville, what we're learning, and the university apparently just did an in-depth look at this, was that the woman who was taken off the street, the only thing that she did was publish an op-ed in a student newspaper that supported Palestine with no mention of Hamas. And yet she was taken by handcuffs right off a street, put in an unmarked vehicle with tinted windows, and next thing you know, she's in Louisiana. The guy in New York at Columbia University, he was involved in the protest down there, but I haven't heard anything as to what he did other than protest or maybe help organize the protest. I don't know if there's anything that suggests he's a Hamas supporter. And yet he was just lifted and off he went. And so it seems like they are targeting students who may have anti-Semitic views. At UMass, I think they just announced today or yesterday that there's 5 or 6 students who have their visas revoked. I have not heard much detail as to why. But if a student is here and organizing protest with the idea that they're going to be violent, or after you're engaged in violent protest, if they're breaking laws, then certainly, hey, let's take a look at their visa, and if they're violating the terms of the visa, then off they go. It's revoked and they're shipped home. But if they are just expressing opinions, again, they're here, they're on our soil, they're in this country, the rights of free speech attached to people who are there. If they're just writing an op-ed, expressing an opinion, or protesting peacefully, expressing an opinion, then I am concerned that that's contrary to what we've always believed in this country, that you have a right to free speech, that you have a right to peaceful protest. And so that's concerning. So I think they're going after folks like that as well. I have not heard yet in Massachusetts that there's been any specific instances where they've gone into elementary schools and removed students. Hopefully that does not occur. I do know, talking to folks involved in education, that the concern of educators is that parents might be swept up, and that all of a sudden it's 2:30 in the afternoon and a child's getting released from school, and there's no parent there to pick them up, and the parent could at that point be already in Louisiana or on their way to El Salvador. People who run after school programs are really concerned about that. That's
a valid concern, because then all of a sudden the school district is now responsible for this child, and what do they do? So what is your view on the hotel situation, and how, like, here in Rockland, right up the street, there's the Comfort Inn that's housing the asylum seekers, the illegal immigrants. How do you view that?
So I visited that a few times. I met with state officials and local officials on it. What happened was, about a year and a half ago, or longer now, maybe coming up on 2 years, the influx of migrants was just beyond something that the state expected, could plan for. And so the decision was made to move them into our emergency assistance shelter program. An emergency assistance shelter program is designed for women and children who are without shelter, that we have a right for them in Massachusetts to have shelter, to have a roof over their head. So there's a structure to that, an infrastructure in place, and the programming was there and the processing was there. So when the migrants showed up, the thought was, because that's already in place, let's move them into that system. Mm-hmm. And as they did that, there just wasn't enough housing available, and so they started to use motels and hotels, which they had been doing up until about 5 or 6 years ago, and the state got away from that. So it became an emergency situation, and that's what they did. It was very expensive. Mm-hmm. I was concerned that there wasn't proper oversight at the facilities, budget oversight, procurement oversight. That were we paying some of these motels, hotels too much?
Yeah.
Were we paying too much for food? And some of that stuff has come out. But over the last year and a half, pretty steadily, the numbers have decreased. And our emergency shelter system was mostly migrants for a short period of time, and then it started to go back again to women and children from Massachusetts and families seeking shelter that were from Massachusetts.
So it is open to American citizens.
Oh, absolutely.
Citizens.
Oh, sure. And after a few months where we got the flood of migrants, it got to the point where the shelter system was basically half and half. It was half migrants and half Massachusetts residents who had lost housing, kind of what we talked about before, because rents had gone up. The building was sold and they were going to convert it to condominiums, whatever the case may be. They would find themselves homeless. Victims of domestic violence, a woman and a child find themselves homeless. So about half the system, as it had been in the past, were folks experiencing those problems. About 6 months ago, 5 months ago, we were at the stage where 65% of those entering the system were Massachusetts residents struggling with housing issues, and the number of migrant people had dropped dramatically. We're now at the stage where we are closing the hotels and motels. Rockland is slated to close. Once it closes, and I can't remember the date, but soon, very soon, then it's going to be kind of rehabbed and then returned as a regular motel. So that is in the works. And the goal is by the end of this calendar year to have all motels and hotels, as it relates to migrants, all those programs shut down. The vast, vast majority of people coming into the system now are Massachusetts residents. Some of that most recently is related to fewer people crossing at the border. But this trend started last summer, where the number of migrants was dropping pretty dramatically, and the number of people from Massachusetts who were seeking shelter was increasing dramatically, and they were kind of replacing each other.
What steps is the state Senate taking to address the high utility costs and provide relief to consumers?
So legislatively, the state of Massachusetts has been moving towards making the state basically net zero in terms of carbon emissions, and it's been pretty ambitious. And in that process, there's always been the tension between whether there'll be enough clean energy available to meet the demand. And that's been something that the state has tried to address. In the meantime, we found the utilities that were increasing the delivery fees, kind of without explanation. But the state board, that's kind of an independent board that looks at those things, did sign off on some of these increases. And so it kind of hit people by surprise that all of a sudden they increased as much as they did. So legislatively, we kind of looked at, okay, what have we done in the past to address this? What can we do going forward? But more immediately, the thought was we've got to put pressure on the governor to reach out to the utilities and reach out to the agency responsible for their oversight and say, this is just unacceptable. And that's been the most immediate way of doing it. And it has had some results. We're starting to see them level off a little bit. The companies now know that they have to lower the rates. They have to provide some rebates to people. They have to provide some offsetting costs in the upcoming months. I don't think it's enough in terms of covering the sudden cost increases, but it's something in the short term. And hopefully as we transition now into spring and summer, that those delivery costs will drop a little bit. But as it relates to gas, that's likely. Electric, you go from using electric for heat now to electric for air conditioning. So we're going to have to monitor that. But the first response was, let's get on the utilities, let's get on the oversight agency, and let's get on the governor to try to address this as quickly as possible. And then legislatively, my expectation is that we will probably pass another energy bill this session, and that addressing those delivery costs will be on the table for discussion.
Yeah, the delivery costs are kind of crazy. My mother just moved out of her house, and she moved into a smaller house. Her bill for electric was $600 for the month. I live in a fairly smaller house, but my bill was, and I'm very, very conservative, shutting off mulch strips, keeping the lights off, making sure all the fans and everything are off. My bill was $90, but $58 of that the past month was just delivery fees. I only used $30-something in actual electric. So I do think that the government needs to kind of step in and put some pressure on these electric and utility companies.
Yeah, and the pressure is being applied. Whether it's going to be enough, quickly enough, remains to be seen. There is going to be a period of time, where as we kind of try to get away from fossil fuels, that cost will go through a period of adjustment. But the goal is to keep the cost as low as possible, and so we'll keep an eye on it. As again, I expect it to be a hot topic in this legislative session, and we'll probably see legislation that addresses energy and specifically addresses what the utility companies can do, and maybe put some guardrails on
pricing guidelines and stuff like that.
I'm sorry, the
pricing guidelines.
Exactly, and the agency that oversees it, or the board that oversees it.
Do you see them ever taxing electricity?
There's some taxes already. You mean the utility companies?
Yeah, like us paying like a tax to the government, like as we would pay for, like say we fast forward 10, 15 years and electric vehicles start to become more and more popular. A lot of the roads and anything automotive is basically paid for by the gasoline taxes and excise taxes. Do you see the residents having to pay taxes on electric similar to how we pay taxes on gasoline?
Yes, something will have to give. And so there's a lot of discussion, a lot of study going on within academic areas among transportation experts as to how to address the likely decline of the money we get from the gas tax. I have a hybrid vehicle. I've had one for several years now. And so I use less gas.
Yeah.
But I use the roads the same amount as I do. I drive the same miles as I was driving, but I'm using less gas because it's a hybrid. And so that's less gas tax revenue coming into the state, even though the road's being used the exact same amount. And so you multiply that by electric vehicles and every other hybrid vehicle that's on the road, and regular vehicles that are just getting better mileage. Gas tax will decline, the revenue that we get. So there's a few things that are being looked at. One is a miles traveled tax. That, I was driving 12,000 miles a year and using this much gas, so that was okay. We're getting the revenue. Now I'm driving 12,000 miles a year. I'm using half as much gas. Do you instead base the tax on the miles traveled because it's the miles traveled that impact the roads? That's one approach that people look at. That's been used in other places in the world with some success. Then they look at increasing tolls on toll roads. But then the response to that is, how fair is that? Because people from Western Mass traveling into Boston, the Mass Pike, they pay. But if you're traveling from the South Shore, you don't pay. And same thing if you're traveling from the North Shore and you come over the Tobin Bridge, you have to pay. So people don't think that's equitable. But that's a topic that for years has been talked about. And then New York has experimented with this. Other cities across the country have with congestion pricing. That if you want to go into Boston during rush hour, you might pay a little more than if you put off your travel and go in 2 or 3 hours after rush hour. Although now it seems like rush hour is 12 hours a day.
Yeah,
but,
seriously.
So congestion pricing is considered an option. And then the other one is, do you just not tax gas? You don't tax by miles traveled. You don't do congestion pricing. Instead, you account for it in some sort of a broader statewide transportation tax. And then some people say, but if I don't have a car and I don't drive and I take public transportation, why should I pay a transportation tax? So there's pros and cons on every one of them, but we do have to find a way to make sure the roads are maintained. The best thing is to push people towards public transportation. Right. I take the T to work pretty frequently, the Red Line. I prefer it to driving. It costs me more because I've already got my fixed cost car, and I'm paying for parking spot. I have to pay taxes on my parking spot at the State House. So it would suggest, well, you already have the car on this parking spot that you're paying for, drive. But traffic the way it is, it's easy to pay the extra money to take the train. It's a lot less stressful. It's more reliable at this stage. So encouraging people to use public transportation, and to build more public transportation is one of the answers.
President Trump has proposed significant changes to the Department of Education. How do you view the ongoing debate about the department, and do you believe in the implications for our state's educational policies?
We're worried about it in a few ways. One, the Department of Education does provide some funding to the Commonwealth, and if the department disappears, it's concerned about whether that funding will disappear or whether the funding will still come to the state, but it just won't be from the department, and it'll come in a different way through a different department. That's to be sorted out. The other concern that we have, and I met with two parents just this week on this issue. They have two young children who have IEPs, individual education plans. They're special needs students, and they have these plans. And the parents are concerned that if the funding dries up at the federal level and the Department of Education disappears, where do the parents go if they find a local community is not doing what they're supposed to do for special education? Because those rights are pretty much guaranteed at the federal level, that you have a right to an education, and if you have special education needs, that you have a right to make sure that you're getting a quality education. They're concerned about communities that may not honor the plan that they have, and they would go to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education here in Massachusetts. But what if they don't get the guarantee there? They would normally turn to the federal government, and it might be an individual action against a school district. It might be a class action against a school district, an individual action against the state, or a class action against the state. But when all that disappears, it disappears at the federal level, who's going to guarantee it? So they're looking at, is there a way that we can file legislation here in Massachusetts to guarantee children with special needs, special educational needs, that they'll get it. And so that's a concern. If the Department of Education is gone, where do you turn to guarantee those rights? And we may have to pass legislation here in Massachusetts to ensure that those rights are still guaranteed.
What role does bipartisanship play in your role at the state Senate?
Get along really well with Republican members of the Senate. There's a lot of tension in Washington, obviously, and throughout the country between Republican and Democrat, less so here in Massachusetts and in the state Senate. And I think in the House of Representatives as well, for the most part, Republicans and Democrats get along. In the state Senate, I work really closely with all my Republican counterparts, most locally with Senator Pat O'Connor, who's from Weymouth, and in the Senate itself with the minority leader, Senator Bruce Tarr, who's from Gloucester. We work together on a bunch of things. And when there's been some procedural issues that we're concerned about in the Senate, I've worked with him. When we were at the end of the last session, which was kind of a mess, he and I both together got up and basically said, time out. We shouldn't be getting bills so quickly without an opportunity to give them a thorough review. We shouldn't be passing them without roll call votes. And he and I joined together on one bill in particular and said, stop it. And we put a hold on the bill to bring attention to the process. And so I work with the Republicans all the time on things like that. They're a really good group to work with. And I think that holds across the legislature. But we have to be careful that given the national climate and even locally it's more partisan, that we don't become adversarial, that we continue to talk with our Republican colleagues, and in the district that we listen to people, whether they're Republican or Democrat, and just and work on it. There's more tension at the State House between the House and the Senate right now than there is between Republicans and Democrats. Yeah. But getting out into the community, listening to people, whether they're Republican or Democrat, and then working with Republican colleagues in the Senate, hopefully we'll continue to be able to do that while everything else kind of goes crazy.
What are some of your biggest accomplishments for your time in office, and some that you're most proud of?
I think the substance use work that we did, a lot of it, we're finally starting to see changes, as I said, in overdose death rates. I think the individual things that we've done in the office, the constituent services, I've been very lucky. I've had 2 constituent services directors in the time that I've been there. It's unusual to keep people that long. They are just phenomenal. And when I go out, when I'm out and about, people will say, Doreen in your office, Ruthie was the one who did before, Ruth in your office, or Doreen in your office. I called them and they took care of things really quickly for me. And just doing that, people call you when they have nowhere else to call, so they call the office, and I'll chat with them. Doreen will chat with them, and then Doreen is like a magician and working through cases. we've been able to help a lot of people over the time that I've been in office. Just yesterday, 3 people came to State House. They had bid at an auction for a tour of the State House. And so they come into State House, I give them a tour, and then before the tour, we grabbed lunch. And a woman said, I have to tell you that when I call the office, somebody always picks up the phone, and all the emails that I write, I get responses to, and that I have worked with Doreen, and she helped me on a matter, and I just can't believe it. And so hearing those stories from people that they've been helped individually is probably the thing that matters most. Somebody needs housing, somebody whose parent needs some sort of assistance from a nonprofit. Could we help with that? Or they're trying to get something from the state to help a parent or a child, and they haven't been able to, and we're able to help. All those types of things. That's without a doubt the most rewarding. And then doing the opioid work. And then most recently, last session, we got passed a revenge porn law, which people from Rockland and Braintree and Quincy, every community that I represent, shared with me their stories about being victims of revenge porn. And so we went to work with a state representative, and we passed a revenge porn law. And we also put into it a deepfake artificial intelligence component, one of the first states to combine the two. And we were able to get that passed. And knowing that it helped these people, it was, it's rewarding.
Yeah.
That it made a difference in their lives, because the stories that you hear are just terrible stories.
Awful.
Yeah.
What advice do you have to any of the younger generation that's interested in entering politics?
I'd say get involved locally, whether it's going to school committee meetings, serving in school government, on a student council, things like that. Whereas they get a little bit older, to go to select board meetings, city council meetings, just learn what's going on, get involved in neighborhood groups. If you're interested in running, if there's a running group and you want to get involved, and then do some charity work through that, that gets you involved in your community. And then once you're involved in your community, you start to think a little bit about the politics of the community and how government plays a role in it. And I think that is a great path for young people. Quick example, in Holbrook, they have a civics club after school. They were worried about vaping. They went to the local board of health and the select board and heightened the attention to it and got some things passed locally. They came to us on the vaping issue, and with those students, we passed the first in the nation tobacco law relative to flavored tobacco products. First in the nation, and it was the kids. And so hopefully those kids will realize that if they're involved in government, they can make a difference. We had a group of 5th graders from the Squantum School in Quincy at the State House the other day. They're involved. We had Student Government Day at the State House just yesterday. 350 students from all across the Commonwealth interested in government. So there's a lot of ways to get involved. And I keep saying it that, and I know it sounds kind of canned or whatever, but they are the future. And every time I interact with the students, I see them at the State House or at the schools, my general sense is we just have to get to them. If we can get to them as a country, we'll do pretty well. And I know some people say, the kids today, they're on the phone too much, they're doing this too much. But my experience has been in dealing with them, there are really a couple great generations coming up, and we just have to make sure there's something left for them that they then can take and improve.
Yeah. Senator Keenan, I want to thank you so much for coming by today.
Thank you.
It's been a blast.
Thanks. This is great.
Thank you very much. Everybody, appreciate you guys watching. You guys can check out my other interviews, and I try to post weekly to my channel, the Seth Rosczewski Podcast. And for tonight's episode, that's going to wrap it up. Thank you. Good night.